Hello and welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. In this video I will be talking about shaping light for your landscape photos. For that reason I do have a very cool base image, so if you want to follow along, feel free to download the raw file. You can find the link in the description of the video. And without much more talking, let's go. So here we can see the raw file. You will notice it's super flat, very boring with low contrast. Now for this image I just want to improve the light saturation. You can see at the moment the sky is way too bright. We do have some light in the foreground with a bit of shadows, but it's way too subtle for my taste. Let's just begin by changing the profile, and I want to switch it to Adobe Standard just to get a more flat base image. Now for the basic stuff I want to start with the white balance. Here I'd like to just drop the tint slightly, getting rid of any purple color cast that's going on in this image. But that's looking good for the moment. Then I want to boost the contrast right away. So let's just do that. And I can further boost it by bringing up the whites. And I can also bring down the blacks a little bit. We do have enough room to do that without ending up with underexposure. You can clearly see that on the histogram. Next, let's introduce a little bit of texture and some clarity, just to give this image a sharper look. Also, I do like to bring up the vibrance just a notch. Perfect. Compared to before, we didn't really change the light much, as you can see. We have just changed the colors a bit to get a more natural looking image. Now, shaping the light is something that not happens globally, but rather we will use local adjustments to fix certain areas of the image. So let's jump into the local adjustments, and first off, I do want to work on that bright sky. So let's just create the sky selection. As I said earlier, I think the whole sky is way too bright and I want to make it darker. But it doesn't make sense to make it darker on the right side, since here the light is coming in. So to not affect the whole sky, I'm going to subtract a linear gradient, just like that, making it really soft so the edge is not too visible. And with this selection I can start by bringing down the exposure very slightly. I also want to bring up the contrast to get more structured clouds. And we could make the sky a little colder by bringing down the temperature. Just like that. Now it might start to look a bit too saturated, so I also want to bring down the saturation. Actually, let's bring it down quite a bit. Okay. And then let's introduce texture and clarity, just for even more details in the clouds. Let's compare to before real quick, and we can see that's already a huge difference, but we can of course further improve that. So again, back to the local adjustments, and looking at the very top of the image, you can see a very dark cloud. I want to work with that and make the top cloud even darker. So for that reason, I'm using another linear gradient and just drag it down over the dark cloud, just like that. And with this selection, I'm going to drop the exposure even further, just like that. Perfect. And thus we have added some more darkness to this image. Now of course in the upper right corner there is a bright spot, but I'm going to fix it later with the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, so don't worry about that spot right now. Next I want to change the foreground. Again, I do want to use a linear gradient. First off, I do want to make a general adjustment to the foreground, so let's create a mask like this. And in here I'd like to raise the contrast, which helps to separate the highlights from the shadows a little more. Then I want to further work on this by bringing up the whole highlights. And I also want to increase the whites while decreasing the shadows. Okay, that looks pretty good. Then let's focus on the very near foreground. Just like in the sky, we do have a dark patch right there at the bottom part. I want to make use of that by creating another linear gradient just along this dark line. And in here I want to further bring down the exposure. Perfect. Now we can clearly see the light hitting the field in the foreground with some stronger shadows going on. The last thing I want to do is to apply a radial gradient, just a big one like this, and try to simulate the light coming in from the right side. So I'm going to place it somewhere here, change the angle a bit, maybe like this. And in here I'm going to bring up the exposure, giving this part a little more light. And I also want to bring up the whites. Perfect. Again, let's compare to before. And you can see with the help of those local adjustments, we have a pretty much completely different scene when it comes down to the light. Much more pleasing to look at. Now let's do a little bit of color grading to further improve this image. I'm starting in the color mixer tab. Here I want to adjust the hue. What I'm noticing first is the colors in the foreground do look a little bit weird. I do want the yellows to be a bit more green, so I'm pushing the yellow hue up. Let's push it quite a bit, and you can see in the foreground we get a very natural green color tone, which just fits the whole image a lot better. Also, I want to drop the purple hue to fix any leftover color cast in the sky. So let's bring it down quite a bit. And let's head over to the saturation. And here I do want to bring up the yellow saturation as well as the blue saturation. Okay, then let's head into the luminance tab. Here's another cool trick to improve that light in the foreground. The bright spots you can see in the grass are mostly affected by the yellow color tone. So that means if I turn up the yellow luminance, those areas will get a lot brighter, and it helps to emulate that light effect even more. So let's just bring it up a little bit. I don't want to overdo it, of course, but that's looking really good. And finally, let's bring down the blue luminance just to make the sky a little darker. Perfect. Let's turn off the color mixer for a moment so you can see there's a big difference going on, thanks to those slight adjustments. So for this image I actually don't want to touch the split toning. I think the colors do look quite nice this way. So this means we are pretty much done with the raw adjustments, and now let's start cleaning up the shot and adding some more light. So first off, there are a ton of sensor spots and other objects I want to get rid of. I'm probably going to skip over this part in the video, but for those sensor spots I'm just using the spot healing brush. Alright, then I want to fix that bright spot in the upper right corner. So let's go there, use the clone stem tool, and I'm copying an area by holding down the Alt key right next to it, and then I'm hovering over it and just brush that spot away. Done. I could try and clean up the horizon a little bit. Again, I'm just using the spot healing brush for that. Alright, that looks much cleaner. I don't think I want to clean up the left side, however, but I do want to enhance that light saturation some more. For that reason I'm going to use some dodging and burning. To do that I'm going to create a new layer, and with that new layer I'm switching the blending mode to overlay. Now on this layer I'm going to use the TK panel plugin, this one right here, and that just allows me to target specific luminance ranges. So for example, let's say I want to target the dark parts of the foreground, then I would just go through the dark masks and look for a mask that's fitting for the selection I need, like this one. Here you can see the shadows are white while the highlights are black or dark gray. So that means this mask is pretty good for the foreground. Let's apply it as a layer mask on this overlay layer. Then I'm grabbing a black brush, and I'm also dropping the brush opacity to not make this effect too strong. And then I'm just brushing over the dark parts of the foreground to make them even darker. Just for example, if I would paint over the bright parts, you would see not much is changing at all here. So let's also paint over the shadows in the background. And we can also change the sky a little bit by making the top cloud even darker. And if I turn off this layer, you can see the difference, quite big. I really like it. Of course, we can do the same for the highlights, so let's apply another new layer. This time I'm going with the soft light blending mode just so this effect is a little more subtle. And again, let's head into the TK panel plugin, and since we target the highlights, I'm going to aim for a lights mask here. Just like this, you can see we have a nice selection for the bright areas in the foreground. So let's add this mask as a layer mask on our overlay layer. And then, of course, instead of black, I'm going to use white as the brush color to make things brighter. We can even turn up the brush opacity again. And then just brush over the foreground. Maybe even introduce some more brightness to the sky. Turning off this layer again, you will see a big difference. And that's pretty much it for shaping the light in this image. At this point, one more thing I want to do is to check the Nik Collection plugin. So let's merge those layers real quick. And now take a look through the Nik Collection plugin. So first off, using the polarization effect, I can actually improve the light even more. This will also affect the colors a little bit, but I think that works really good. So let's just bring up the strength here. And I think I want to apply it like that. Let's see if we can something else. Let's try the Pro Contrast filter with some dynamic contrast. I don't want to overdo it, but a little bit might help for this shot. Okay, so let's just apply it like that. Okay, finally, let's take a look at the histogram once more. I think I can bring up the vibrance a little further, so let's use a levels adjustment layer and just bring that point for the highlights down to the left a little bit, so we get some more contrast going on. And at that point, that's it for editing this image. So I hope this Photoshop tutorial was helpful and interesting. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask in the comments, and thank you very much for watching this video.